Hello and welcome back. In this video we'll be looking at buying a go-kart and more specifically how I bought a go-kart not for myself but for my son. He's reaching an age where he's allowed to go on track and start practicing. So we've bought a go-kart. I'm hoping he will enjoy the sport and we will go through the different classes of go-karting in the UK, and I'm hoping you'll join me on this journey. If you do like this type of content, please make sure to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. I just really want to mention that I do speak as a complete novice and someone who has never raced in the UK, but I do think this will be a really good learning curve for myself as well as for my son. There are lots of videos on YouTube telling you how to get into go-karting, what are the costs, what are the different options, and most of them involve going onto some corporate karting events, indoor karting, outdoor karting, where you go and you rent something and you basically use someone else's kit. Now, for me, that's not really an option. My son is 4.5 years old, and on any kind of corporate track where you rent a go-kart, they won't really allow kids below the age of 7 to go on track. And even if they did, most go-karts, you can't fit a 4-year-old because they can't reach the pedals. They're just not adjustable enough, and they're generally quite big and heavy, and it's difficult for a young child to operate. And that's kind of the main reason why I decided to buy my own go-kart. The other reasons are that we will be working on the go-kart together, so it's going to be more of a family event. And I'm hoping this will become a kind of a weekend getaway for the whole family. Now, some of you might think that I've got more money than brains, and you shouldn't allow such a young child to get on a go-kart. But from my perspective, this is the cheapest go-karting it's ever going to be. If you want to get into go-karting later on, when your kid is 7 or 8 years old, it gets a lot more expensive. Races are a lot more competitive. The categories require better chassis, better engines. So getting in at that price point, I think, is very expensive. Whereas at 4 years old, and he will start racing when he's 5 or 6 at a Bambino class, this is kind of the cheapest you can ever get go-karting to be. And if it turns out that he doesn't like it, right, I've got my second child who we're gonna try and do the same. And so we've got this go-kart. We plan to keep it for a number of years and basically just see if they like it. Then we'll move ahead through the categories and get bigger and better equipment. If they don't, then I feel like I'm not losing out too much. I can afford at this point in time. I can buy this relatively inexpensive piece of kit for my kids. So you might be asking, where do you find a go-kart? How do you know what class or category of go-kart to buy for your own child? So I started looking on Facebook Market and Facebook groups. I knew that Bambino is the youngest class of go-karting, so I entered a number of Bambino specific Facebook groups and just look through there. You'll find on a weekly basis someone is posting their go-kart, sometimes with all the kit, for sale because their child is moving up a class. The second best place is eBay, right? You can, as long as you know what you're searching for, you will find quite a number of options. And then probably the third and probably best option is just go at a track. Find a local track that does events at the class that you want to buy a go-kart for. Have a chat with the parents, see who's moving up a class, see how well the kid is driving the go-kart, how well the go-kart performs. That just gives you a much better understanding of how good that particular go-kart is. Someone that wins a championship this year and is looking to move up to the next class for next year, they've got a pretty good piece of kit that you could buy because they will most likely be looking to move it on. My main aim was to find a go-kart that can be used for practice, and it's the same class that my son will eventually start racing in. It was important that my son fits in it. It was important to have the right engine, so a Comer C50, that would be what he'll be racing eventually. There are different types of engines that they use in the Bambino class. One of them would be the Comer C50. The other one is the iArmy, I think it's called. I'm not quite sure. That's a 50cc two-stroke engine as well, but it's a bit more expensive, and you need a few races with a common engine before you can race the faster 50cc's, as far as I understand. And the last requirement was for the go-kart to work, even if it needs a bit of work doing to it. But what I didn't realize was the cost of parts for these engines. So my son already has a two-stroke mini quad and a pit bike, and parts for those are really cheap. Like nothing costs more than 15-20 pounds for any part, whereas for the go-karts everything is really expensive. I was looking to buy a coil pack, and they are 120 pounds. Now that is a lot more than a complete engine for his two-stroke quad. So that's just a lesson that I'll take away with me when I look at potentially upgrading the go-kart in the future. Now that I have the go-kart, I did a really thorough check, making sure that everything works. So I started by taking the brakes apart, cleaning them, putting them all back together, lubricating all the moving bits that need lubricating, just to give him the best chance at actually stopping. He doesn't have a lot of force in his legs, so making the brakes a bit easier to operate is important. And these are cable brakes, it's not hydraulic at this stage. The next was the steering. So I have a friend, he helped me out with a laser steering alignment, so we got that all in check. I've checked the chain and the sprockets and installed a sprocket protector. Next I took the engine off, had a quick look at it, look at the spark plug, look at the coil pack, which I've already mentioned that I'm looking to change. Just cleaned it up a bit, took the carburetor apart, making sure that's all clean, because I don't know how well it's been maintained in the past. Next we changed the tires, used a used set of tires, because what you'll find is that in the higher classes, cadet, they will go through a set of tires every race. So when you show up to a race, you will have to buy a new set of tires in order to compete. They will not let you bring your own tires. So we just got a set of used tires that were used for one race. And then finally, what I did was just limit the throttle pedal movement. It's currently, he can only use about 25% of the entire throttle, just to make sure he doesn't go too quickly or accelerates too quickly. The reason for that is I just don't want him to scare himself, because he doesn't yet understand how much throttle input to give. He's more of a on-off attitude to it. Now at this point we are ready to go on our first practice session. My son hasn't yet been out on the go-kart at all. He's kind of done a few laps of the garden, which is a pretty small garden, and he seemed to enjoy it. So hopefully we'll do a practice session and let you all know how it goes. In the next video I'll go through all the costs so far and how much you should expect to pay if you want to go from nothing other than some tools that you have lying around to reaching your first practice session.